Ellie Wood. I've been teaching with Francis just for this 1 year, but I've been teaching for 5 years. I've been a second in department, so responsible for Key Stage 3 as well. So I wanted to put to you like a practical way, because sometimes you can come to these CPD days and it's all theory and you think, oh okay, how am I supposed to put that into the classroom then? I've taught across all of the key stages as well. I'm teaching Key Stage 3, 4 and 5 at the moment, so what I'm going to talk to you about should be applicable across the board, and also hopefully you should be able to differentiate it right the way down and also right the way up depending on the abilities in your classroom. I've had experience teaching Shakespeare to deaf kids before. Now, as you can imagine, with their limited language acquisition, that was quite a challenge. So, storyboarding Shakespeare, you can differentiate and play around with it. So, first of all, I think the first thing that any of us think when it comes to teaching Shakespeare is, well, where the bloody hell do I even start? There's so much to cover. The plays can be quite epic when you think about how long they are and how you're ever going to get a whole class of 30 kids to understand that. When you think about the time as well, trying to fit that into the context, trying to think about the assessment objectives and trying to get something actually worthwhile out of this in quite a short space of time. There's a lot of obstacles that we have to overcome, notwithstanding this reaction from the kids. I think that we can all probably say, as soon as we mention that we're going to be teaching Shakespeare, they run in fear, or they immediately say, it's going to be boring, it's going to be hard, it's old, it's irrelevant, why do I need to learn this? It doesn't apply to us anymore. And I think their biggest fear, a lot of the time, is because they're not going to understand it because of the language. They see it as a barrier. So I think that we've got that on us, against us, as well as something else. Curriculum changes as well, constantly going round and round and round in circles. So if you've looked at the new Key Stage 3 spec, there's a lot of changes going on. It's quite content heavy. You've got to study 2 authors in depth, cover poetry and a Shakespeare near enough every year. So for me, that kind of means that you can't just hash out A Midsummer Night's Dream every year from Year 7 right up until Year 11. You have to give them some variety. You have to think of active ways of getting them engaged with Shakespeare. I also think that it's quite a lot to get through in terms of practicalities. It's a lot to get through in a year. If our years are very fragmented, so when we've got maybe between 5 and 7 weeks per half term to work with, trying to teach Richard III in what could potentially be 5 weeks and get an assessment and mark it, give it back to them for improvement is really, really, really challenging. So I think that we've got obstacles from the kids, we've got obstacles like time against us, but it actually can be done. And I'm sure that, I don't want to come across as patronising, I'm sure that we've all thought the first thing that we do is actually get to know the story first. I'm sure you probably recognise some of these books. Leon Garfield is a genius for creating these short versions, prose versions of the plays. I think he was also linked to the Shakespeare animated tales. So we have to get to know the story as well. There are going to be a lot of Shakespeare plays that you might come across that you haven't studied maybe at uni or you haven't been taught yourself. I'm teaching King Lear for the first time ever, and I've never studied it. So you have to understand it before you can then pass it on. I know that sounds really obvious, but these things help us out. I think it's really easy for us as well to kind of think, right, okay, first lesson, I've got Year 7 and I'm supposed to be teaching them Macbeth. We're going to all sit down and we're going to listen to Leon Garfield telling us the story. We'll sit and read it, or we'll photocopy it and we'll read it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It can just take a little bit of time. If we're not using these, then we are letting dear old Kenneth Branagh doing the storytelling for us. We can sit back and stick a DVD on. And DVDs really do have their place in Shakespeare. Obviously, Shakespeare is about being performed, it's about it being visual, it's about it being understood, in terms of stagecraft as well. But I've done it, certainly sat there and thought, right, brilliant, that's 5 lessons sorted then. I can stick Macbeth on the DVD player, pause it every now and again, sitting at the back of the room with a TV remote and saying, right, this is what's going on now, right, this is what's happening here. And actually, although we kind of first assume that that might be easy, it's easy for us, and also that it might be time-saving, it's not. A Shakespeare play, a film version, about between 2 and 3 hours long, drag that out with pausing every now and again, can take a week's worth of lessons. And if we're on a tight schedule, then that's quite kind of a lot of time, not wasted, but kind of spent being quite passive if you're a student. So I was thinking about this, being the Shakespeare geek that I am, and I thought I need to think of some kind of practical way that's quick and easy and also quite active. So what I'm going to do, just to prove a point, is I've got these handouts and I'd like you to just take one and pass it on. And on the front it's a plot summary, not of a Shakespeare play. I should have split it and gone both ways, that's an amateur teacher thing to do, isn't it? You want me to have half and then I can split the other way. There you go. I just want you to have a go at reading that plot summary. If you recognise it, don't say anything. And imagine you are a Key Stage 3 student. Does anybody recognise it? It's a play called The White Devil by John Webster. And I'm currently teaching it to my Year 13s. But the reason why I gave you this one is because I thought you're all English teachers. I didn't want to give you the story, the plot line of Macbeth, because you defeat the object. This might be something that they haven't come across, you haven't come across before. How many of you were slightly bored to tears within the first few sentences? How many of you lost track of the names? I would have to sit and look at that and think, right, okay, who is this person? And do a flowchart or do a family tree. When I first studied Richard III, I got nowhere without some kind of diagram of, right, okay, who's, they're not even there historically. Margaret's not supposed to be there, but she is anyway. Like, so trying to think, putting that in front of a Key Stage 3 or even a Key Stage 4, or even a Key Stage 5 student, bores them to tears. We're English teachers and we can't even make sense of that. I don't think it's a practical way forward. I think that it can be confusing and quite passive as well. So what I was thinking is a more active approach. I came across these brilliant short cartoons on Facebook, actually. A friend, I follow Shakespeare on Facebook and so should all of you. I found these and it kind of really made me laugh because it kind of got my thought process, the ball rolling. They're by an artist called Maya Gosling, and she does Shakespeare in 3 panels. And you can see how simplified these are. So you've got Romeo and Juliet's families hate each other, Romeo and Juliet love each other, Romeo and Juliet kill themselves. Now obviously there's quite a lot missing from that. That's an oversimplification of, sorry, do you want me to move? An oversimplification of the plot lines. But we need some kind of happy medium between that plot summary and this, which leads me onto the next slide. So I was trying to think, could you actually do King Lear in 3 panels? Probably not, there are too many subplots, same with Richard III.
Excuse me, I have a quick question. You mentioned you follow on Facebook, which...
Oh, I found, it was literally a friend just found the Shakespeare page and it was promoting these cartoons.
Oh, okay.
So if you Google, her name's Maya, M-Y-A, Gosling.
But when you said the Shakespeare page on Facebook, that was...
Yeah, it's just a like thing, you just like
okay.
Shakespeare.
Okay.
So if you just type Shakespeare into Facebook, it should come up. It's a bit odd, I don't know what he'd make of it. So I came up with kind of, this was almost like a draft version of things, and I've used this in my Year 9 class, and if you flip over on the other side of your plot summaries, I've got a smaller version of it. So I essentially came up with a flowchart idea. So I've got the 2 families, I've then got an interactive flowchart. So I haven't just given them the flowchart so they can sit there and look at it. They have to draw the lines to the bits, they have to interact with it, they have to fill in blanks. And this was a really, really simplified version. And you could do this whilst watching the film if you wanted to make it less passive. What I chose to do was to do a bit of physical storyboarding, and I got the kids up and gave them name labels, and we did freeze frames of the key parts of the play. So I cleared the classroom, so desks all round in a horseshoe shape, printed off just literally an A4 page with a name on, and gave it to the kids to hold, got them into groups, got them into freeze frames, and as we were freeze framing in the middle of the classroom, the rest of the kids were around the outside filling in the flowchart. When they weren't involved in a freeze frame, they went and sat down and filled in the rest of the flowchart. So everybody is listening actively, everybody's engaging with what's going on. Also, I think that because you're getting them up out of their chair and you're making them do something physical, that it's going to stick in their mind a little bit easier. They also really, really liked it. They really put themselves into it. It wasn't embarrassing because it wasn't, right, okay, Jimmy, now you're going to have to play Lady Margaret and you're going to have to speak like a girl, and it's not like the whole humiliation thing. They didn't have to say the Shakespeare lines. It was Shakespeare, but without the barrier of the language. It was me telling the story in terms that they could understand. So just to talk you through what I did, whilst I was taking photos of what was going on, I documented all of the photos, numbered them, and then turned them into a photo album. The writing, it's from the point of view of Richard III. So you've got Edward got the crown, grrr, kind of things like that. You can edit in later. And then I printed this off to them so they had a Richard III photo album that they could refer to, rather than one of those horrific plot summaries, which are, confusing. You can have fun with it, put editing on it. You can clearly see that they're enjoying it as well, and they're not embarrassed to do this, because it doesn't mean that they have to speak, it doesn't mean that they have to act it out, which can be, especially teenage boys, can be a little bit like, I'm not sure, I don't want to do that in front of my mates. Just some more pictures of them there. I think my nephews were complete idiots. I told them they'd be safe in the tower, but that's where they were murdered. Again, cleverly arranged by me. And so you can just really have some fun with that and make it a bit more accessible to them. This would work really, really well with low ability kids as well, who don't necessarily need all the ins and outs of Richard III. I left out Buckingham completely, left out all the peripheries that you don't really need to know about, well, they don't need to know about to get an assessment out of what is Richard III like, what kind of character is he. So I did this as an initial lesson, and this whole thing took an hour's lesson to get through the plot, the key bits of the plot, with them acting it. It's a lot of prep on my part. It meant that I had to print out the names on the A4 sheets, I had to give them the flowcharts and make sure the tables were clear, but I'd rather do that than spend 5 lessons with them bored to tears watching another Ian McKellen or Kenneth Branagh version of, the same old play. And they quite enjoyed it.
I have a question, so I want to make sure that I understand it correctly. So this was pretty much your first lesson, okay? And so you just kind of talked about what the play was about? Yeah,
literally. With this one, because I know Richard III quite well, I've studied it in detail, I've wrote my dissertation on it, I was able to just go blah, 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 this is happening now, this is happening now.
Okay.
If you're unsure about it, you can have a summary.
Yeah.
When I've done this with King Lear, as you'll see in a minute, I actually used the York Notes summaries to structure the flowchart that I produced, so that I kept that in my hand just to remind myself of what was happening next.
And you just talked about it, and then as you spoke about it, the kids filled in the flowchart?
Yeah, so they asked questions, I asked them questions. It was very interactive.
Okay.
So they would say, okay, I might say, how's this person feeling now? Why are they doing this? So ask about the characters' motives.
Okay.
It also lends itself really nicely to talking about staging, because you've got them at the sides and they're doing something physically. You can say, right, well, if you were going to put on a production of this, how would you have them moving? Where would you have them standing? And that links in nicely with the OCR spec at the moment. I know it's changing, but when it comes to looking at Key Stage 4 and their Shakespeare assessment, where they have to talk about mise-en-scene, they have to talk about costume, it links in nicely with that. I think another reason not to do DVDs all the time, especially with maybe weaker ability kids, I can't tell the amount of Romeo and Juliet essays that I've read where I've watched the Leonardo DiCaprio version and they think the Capulets are Spanish. Or they think that they use guns and they can't differentiate that. No, that's Baz Luhrmann's choice. That's one version of it. We can go back and watch the Zeffirelli version, but I'm not sure you really want to. So they need that clear distinction. They've just got the story. There's nothing else confusing it or blurring the lines here. So that's the final bit. So what about higher key stages then? You could easily do that with Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. I've got at the moment 2 year 12s going into year 13s who I'm teaching one the White Devil and one King Lear. And actually, they loved doing this. They were even more enthusiastic than the Key Stage 3 were. So if you have a look in the booklet, I've produced, this is how sad I am, I've produced this was hand-drawn, so please don't mock my drawings. I did a hand-drawn version of King Lear, an interactive comic, to give them. So it was 12 sides, so by the time I photocopied it was 6 pages, sorry. I'd spaced it out as well. I tried to make it fun and interactive, threw in as many Game of Thrones references as I could, because they all love it. Tried to have a little bit more fun with it. I'm Edmund, a grumpy bastard. Like, trying to make it interesting for them. And I know that if you looked on the face of this, it is just questions, bullet points, fill in the blanks, and you think, well, that's what a Key Stage 2 teacher would do. But for them to just grasp King Lear in a very short space of time, it worked. So what you've got here is the skeleton of the plot. So I used the York notes for this, and drew out the bits that I thought were relevant, made sure I referenced the fact that there were subplots in it, so that and later on I also said subplot merges with main plot, and made sure that, because King Lear has so many different levels to it, as well as characters dressing up as other characters, characters going by other names, that it gets confusing. So whilst we were filling in the flowchart, they were also doing some freeze frames as well. Oh, sorry, that's just my favourite cartoon of King Lear running into the forest. They got up as well, and this time, instead of having them hold the piece of the paper, which I felt limited their postures, I attached string to them and hooked them around their necks. And they loved it. So I've got Goneril and Regan having a metaphorical fight over Edmund, who's been leading them both on. I've got Regan and Cornwall plucking out Gloucester's eyes, and a very insane-looking King Lear wearing a makeshift crown from one of my cardigans. It just goes to show that I wanted to show you this because I haven't gone out to Toys R Us and bought a hobby horse and a wimple for somebody to wear. I do, unfortunately, have those things lying around my house, but I don't want to keep lugging them backwards and forwards to school. Freeze frames, it doesn't mean that you have to dress them up. It doesn't have to be embarrassing. It doesn't have to take loads and loads of time. It can be as simple as going on Publisher, typing in a name, printing it out, hole punching it, putting a string around it, and then just sticking it over their heads. Or if you don't want to even do the string, just get them to hold it. Okay, it can be as easy as that. They loved this, and one of the things that really took me by surprise when I handed these out, I thought they were going to rip me to pieces. I thought they were going to say, you've got too much time on your hands, your drawings are awful, what is this, and mock me, but they really didn't. They actually said, I can't believe you've done this for us. They were overwhelmed with the amount of effort that I'd gone to. And for me, teaching this for the first time, it helped me understand the plot as I was doing it as well. So I understand, having been a teacher for the last 5 years, that especially an English teacher, our workloads are horrific. So marking, planning, and now I'm saying, right, go off and do a 12-page storyboard of the best Shakespeare play that you can find. It doesn't have to be that way. If you've got time, do it. That took me an evening. I blocked out the TV, blocked out my husband, blocked out the cat, and sat there and drew it. But if you don't have time, reverse it. Do the freeze frame, you tell the story, get them to do their own version of a storyboard or a flowchart. It's really good for a revision. You can collect those in, photocopy them, and use them for next year, and claim that you've drawn them yourself. So that's kind of where I was going with it. It's fun, it's really, really easy, it's very, very practical. They appreciate the creativity of it, and it's a hell of a lot more fun than staring at Kenneth Branagh's face for 5 hours.
Do you do a brief introduction of the characters before
you can do. So what you could do, this wasn't the very, very first lesson with King Lear, because there were quite a few characters dressing up as other characters. I did a very quick 1 hour, so I gave them, I put together a King Lear pack, a Cordelia pack, a Goneril pack, in a folder which had an analysis about that long of each character, and they had, I think it was 6 minutes to read the summary and make notes. And I said, right, swap, swap for an hour, so they knew who the characters were, but didn't necessarily know all of the ins and outs. And then they could piece it together when they were doing this bit.
It's quite nice as well. I think that's an absolutely brilliant idea, but it's quite nice as well not even telling them Shakespeare. Then they've got ownership of the plot before they've even looked at it.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Then they're like, oh, actually, I get it already. Oh,
Yeah.
it's not that bad.
It's not that bad, and because what you're doing is you're taking away the fear which is associated with the language, and when you take that away, and you just, the most important thing that I found with when I teach Shakespeare, be enthusiastic about it, be practical about it, but also say that he's just a human being, and all the people, all the characters in his plays are also human beings, particularly in King Lear. They're feeling emotions that we feel today, jealousy, hatred, we want flattery all the time. It's bare human emotion. We haven't actually changed that much, and it's when you start explaining that, it could be something out of Game of Thrones, which every, from about year 9 plus, maybe even some year 7s are watching and addicted to. And I think George R.R. Martin said that Game of Thrones was based on the Plantagenets anyway, so Richard III, that's sorted. I'm not saying stick on Game of Thrones, don't do that. But if you can make those references and those links, then they kind of see, oh, it's not as scary as I thought it was going to be.
With obviously the comic's amazing, and the comic's amazing, totally going to steal it. But so obviously it's really interactive. So are they going in and filling sort of in as you're doing different lessons?
So what we're doing, they're filling it in that hour lesson where we're doing the freeze frames.
And they do all of this in an hour?
In an hour.
That's really good.
Hang on, the King Lear one took an hour and about 15 minutes of a
Okay.
second lesson.
Okay.
So there was a little bit of hangover, but that was the first time I'd ever done it. So that was pretty much it. I've put on the back as well of how to create an interactive storyboard, and I didn't want to come across as patronising. I know that we're all capable of thinking about plot lines, but I just wanted to make sure that how my thought process was put onto paper for you. I often find that hand drawing is just quick. It's really easy, and you don't have to be a fantastic artist. You can stick men will suffice. Equally, if you are scared of doing hand drawn stuff, I did that Richard III thing on Publisher, and that didn't take long at all, for maybe about half an hour.
So just going to ask how you go from this and then teaching them about the language.
What I would do is I would then make I don't teach the whole play. You don't have time to read and sit and read all of it. You make reference to this. So I haven't done a photo album with King Lear, but for example, the Richard III one, they had their photo albums. When we gave them Act 1, Scene 1, just that first scene, I then sort of said, right, okay, this is what's happening. Can you tell me what's happening in Act 1? What's going on? Why? And then we look at the language bit by bit, stage by stage. Pick out the key scenes. I knew what my assessment was for that module. It was, how is Richard III portrayed as a villain or something like that. So I knew which bits to pick out. And once they understand the basic storyline, you can just have a dialogue with them as you're reading it, and they can grasp the language from there. Anything else?
So is that something you do regularly? Because I'm currently doing Much Ado with my year 9s, and the issue is we've just come from, last term was a 5-week term where I was meant to do Macbeth in 5 weeks.
I know.
And we still come from, at my school, this kind of ethos of do the play in 5 weeks. So is that something actually you regularly don't do? You don't read the entire play, you pick and choose sections?
I don't think it's physically impossible to read an entire Shakespeare play.
Thank you, because that's what I've been saying.
It's
that
not.
5 weeks is insane.
It's
but
ridiculous. And get an assessment out of them, because really, if you've got a 6-week term, you need to get to know them to know the plot. So that's going, and a bit of context. So week 1 gone. Then you need to do your key scenes. So referring back to your question, your assessment question of whatever it is, that's going to take 2 to 3 weeks. Looking at the language, getting them to write P paragraphs, peer assessment, all of that. And then by the time that you've actually given the exam question, they've written it, depending on which key stage it is, if they're doing it in controlled conditions or if they're just doing it in year 9 in the style of a GCSE exam. That's going to take another week. You've then got to take it in, mark it, give it back to them. They've got to improve it. It's impossible to read a whole play. It is impossible. Yeah, it is physically impossible. But pick out the key moments. As long as you don't lose parts of the play in missing bits out, So, for example, I wouldn't be able to teach King Lear without teaching the subplot of Edmund and Edgar. It wouldn't make sense. So you need to make sure that you've got the key bits of it. I hope you've enjoyed that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.